Good morning. This is the first of the demonstration videos that I want to circulate to all the students that are in my MU152 class this spring semester. It's Functional Piano 2. And we are going to be looking at a piece out of your textbook on page 84 called Connections. Now, this is one of those that when you open the book and look at it for the first time, you may be really intimidated because it looks like there's a lot of busy stuff on the page. But I want to talk us through this piece, and we'll see that this really isn't maybe as imposing as it might look at first glance. First thing to note is that for our purposes in Piano 2, we are only going to go up to the downbeat of measure 21. So at the top of the second page, you can mark there when we get to that downbeat. That's where we'll stop. There's a lot of repetition on the second page that I don't think we really need to worry about for our purposes. So let's talk through what you see with this piece. Now at this point, I might like for you to pause the video and ask yourself some questions. As I look at this piece, just putting eyes on it on day one, what do I notice that might constitute patterns? Do I see what the composer is trying to accomplish from a compositional standpoint? Do I see things that repeat, or do I see ideas that seem even visually to occur over and over in this piece? Why don't you pause this for just a second and see if you can look for some of those things in this piece. So hopefully you see that there are some repeated elements that will go through this piece. Starting at the beginning, if you look at what your hands are doing separately, your left hand comes in with a C major chord, followed by the right hand playing the same notes arpeggiated. And this whole piece is built on that kind of a pattern between the hands. In the first half of the first measure. Then the chord changes in the second half of that measure to E minor. The second measure is like the first. And so on. Now in this video I don't want to give you all the answers, but one thing that I think would be really helpful to do is to take a pencil, write on your textbook, it's okay if you do that, at each half a bar, make note of what chord you're seeing. And we're not interested in Roman numerals with this piece, but just write in, am I seeing C major here? Make note of that. E minor in the second half of measure 1. Make note of that. When you see measures 3 and 4, they're the same. And I'm not going to tell you what those chords are. Hopefully you can figure this out, but write in notes to self. For example, is this A flat major chord or is this C sharp minor chord? It's neither of those, but the point is you should be able to look at these and figure out what chord is outlined with the left hand triad and then the broken chord in the right hand. When you get to measure 5, the pattern changes a little bit, but it's still the same kind of idea. Chord and then broken chord in the right hand. Make note at the end of the first line, you see in your left hand a clef change. The left hand is moving up into treble clef range. But that doesn't need to bother you because what's happening is just your left hand moving up from the beginning. And then in measure 5, it's going up just a little bit more. And I think the reason the composer did this is because if the clef change wasn't there, what you would see is a bunch of ledger lines above the bass clef staff, which would be really confusing to read. So it's really to your advantage to see, oh, that's just a whatever chord it is in the treble clef. When you get to measure 6, what you're going to see is the same information as in measure 5 repeated. So what measure 5 had done, when you read the notes, measure 6, just the same thing down an octave. And from there, measure 7 continues the same kind of pattern that was established at the beginning. So again, when you get to measure 7, I'd recommend first half of that bar, ask yourself, what is that chord? Write in what it is. Second half of measure 7, what is that chord? Major, minor, write in whatever it is. And hopefully as you start doing the note reading, you'll see that even though this piece looks really intimidating, it maybe doesn't have to be once you realize what our composer here, Lynn Freeman Olson, was trying to accomplish with this. So I want to show you something that's a little bit different starting down in measure 13. This is the bottom of the first page. And you're going to see a little bit of a change in the pattern. And when you do the note reading, you're going to ask yourself what those notes are, and when you come up with the right answer, it's going to seem really dissonant and weird. So just to play this for you in measure 13 and 14, you have a chord in the right hand. I'll go ahead and give you this answer. It's an F major chord. And then your left hand is playing also in treble clef, the F sharp and the G sharp, right in between the notes of the F major chord your right hand is playing. So from this camera angle, you may be able to see me do this, but what's going to happen is your right hand will play, and then for your left hand to reach those couple of sharps, it's almost as though your left hand is going to have to reach up above your right hand and find those sharps with these couple of fingers and just kind of point at them from above so that you get a technique that looks a little bit like this. And then the same thing in measures 15 and 16. So again, once you find out what those patterns feel like, you'll see that measure 13-14 is exactly the same as measure 15-16. That's exactly the same as measure 17-18, and so on. So the chords change, but the pattern is the same. The feeling of this hand-on-hand is going to be the same for each one of those passages. When you look at measures 19 and 20, what you see is something that we call, as pianists, planing chords, P-L-A-N-I-N-G, planing chords. And what that means is that you just have these white key chord shapes that are bouncing around without regard to how they really function. Like again, we're not talking about Roman numeral analysis here, so you don't have to worry about is this a minor 6 or the 4 or what chord am I seeing. Those shapes are just bouncing around the keyboard, and as it happens in measures 19, 20, and to the downbeat of 21, it's all just white keys. So let me play this for you at the beginning so you have a recording to go off of. I've kind of got this on purpose to where you can't see everything my hands are playing because I want you to be able to think through the theory behind what is this chord in the second half of measure 3, for example, and not just necessarily watch me play to see what chord I'm reaching for at the piano. So this is this piece, Connections, starting at the beginning, and I'll end at the downbeat measure 21. Stop measure 21. So we will talk about this piece in class a little bit more in person next week, but I would definitely recommend watching this video through with the score in front of you. Even better yet would be at a piano, so you can start to feel through some of these things as you watch the video. And start working on learning notes, fingerings, hand positions, etc. for this piece in advance of class next week. I will give you some practice tips in class. They will involve more or less doing things like this, where you find the chord that both hands are playing and just play them as block chords in both hands and practice moving that position around as giant 6-note chords. And hopefully, if you have that feeling of how the chord motion works, splitting the notes apart into the way the piece is actually composed might be an easy later step.